In 2016, Cambridge Analytica advised then-candidate Donald Trump to promise voters he would drain the swamp, and most of them assumed he meant our government's infestation by deep-pocketed corporate lobbyists. TYT Investigates reporter Alex Kotch looked into how that's going at the United States Department of Agriculture. I asked him what he found and how he found it.
I believe in January, I was looking at some of the ethics waivers that White House counsel Don McGahn had issued to various officials in the Trump administration. So when they have to issue an ethics waiver, it means that this person who works at a various department or agency under the Trump administration likely has a conflict of interest. But what they're doing is so important, and they're the best candidate to do that, that they should be able to sort of waive the ethics requirements in order to do that. So I was looking at this a few months ago, and I found a corn syrup lobbyist who had joined the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, to advise the secretary on dietary guidelines for Americans. Which is a pretty glaring conflict of interest, especially considering that high fructose corn syrup and sugars are widely known to be, to lead to diabetes and other kinds of health problems. And then I continued to follow the waivers, and there were several more made public on March 7th on the Office of Government Ethics website. So I found three more recent lobbyists who had joined the USDA under Trump, and all three of them were given ethics waivers because they lobbied for the food industry as well, and were about to start working on policies that they had just lobbied.
So if you look at the waivers that he wrote, does he make arguments that are convincing?
Not to me at all. I mean, he essentially says in all three of these latest ones, this person has a ton of knowledge in, say, the food stamp or SNAP program. So therefore, despite the fact that she was lobbying for the National Grocers Association on the food stamp program, she's the number one best person to do this for the government, and therefore we have to grant her a waiver. For example, I was just referring to Maggie Lyons, who was appointed last year to advise the Food and Nutrition Service division of the USDA on programs like SNAP, on WIC, which is the Women, Infants, and Children program, and I think she's working on the National School Lunch program as well. She studied corporate communications in college. I don't see any evidence on her LinkedIn profile that she has any kind of expertise in science or nutrition, yet she's now a senior advisor and the chief of staff, actually, of Brandon Lips, who is the administrator of the Food and Nutrition Service.
Yeah, it seems that you have to have some basic knowledge of the policies you're trying to influence, first as a lobbyist, now as someone inside the USDA. So saying that they have some knowledge about the subject isn't necessarily a good excuse.
Yeah, I mean, the conflict is surely her recent lobbying on behalf of the food industry, not on behalf of the people. That, I think, is a huge conflict when we're talking about just the health and well-being of a number of Americans.
So tell me about this graphic. You actually made it yourself. I'm super impressed.
At the top, you have Kaylee Kotch. She is the former corn syrup lobbyist. The Corn Refiners Association is the largest. It represents the four largest corn syrup producers in America. So you can see with the arrows and the connections that she also used to lobby for the National Grocers Association, and now she's a policy advisor at the USDA. On the left there, Maggie Lyons is the other lobbyist. She came directly from the National Grocers Association. You have Brooke Appleton, the corn growers and the wheat growers lobbyist there. Sonny Perdue just in there for reference as the secretary. And then you have in the top right, Christy Boswell, who came from the American Farm Bureau Federation and is now a senior advisor at the USDA.
U.S. Department of Agriculture says that, I have to say, the first thing that popped up was, are there regulations that are getting in your way? Let us know what they are. After that, I was able to find this mission statement. We have a vision, it says, to provide economic opportunity through innovation, helping rural America to thrive, to promote agriculture production that better nourishes Americans. For the taxpayer, how does having industry lobbyists setting policy within the USDA conflict with what that mission statement purports?
Well, most big businesses, I mean, their first order of business is profit. And profit doesn't necessarily square with things like our health, our nutrition, the conservation efforts, our environment's health, things like that. So as we've seen all around the Trump administration, we have big business interests kind of coming in and helping set policy. Now, I'm sure the USDA does some good things for farms and for the American people, but I think it's pretty safe to say that when you have a number of lobbyists coming in, being given ethics waivers to do things that are probably unethical, on behalf essentially of big business and trade groups that represent big business, I don't think that's a very good thing for the American people.
When I talk to people who like to participate in a way that they have a pecuniary financial interest, but also serve the public, what they say is, I might have that interest, but my interest is aligned with the interest of the public. For instance, it creates more jobs when the large agricultural industries don't have regulations like safety, or they don't have to worry about how they treat the immigrant workers that come in. And therefore, my interest as a corporate lobbyist is in line with the interest of the public. What would be a response to that argument?
Well, first of all, you have to ask if that's actually true that some of these policies will help create jobs. What kind of jobs are they? Are they good jobs? Are they seasonal agricultural worker jobs for people who come in seasonally and live elsewhere? And then you have to ask what kind of profits are being made, by the business owners in these fields, and also by the lobbyists and lobbying firms that are representing these fields. I don't think that the Corn Refiners Association is extremely worried about the salaries of their workers who do manual labor for them. I think they're more concerned about the business profits and we don't know what's happening with those, but there's no accountability on the private side, no requirement that they distribute the wealth fairly.
Right. So if there's a perfect balance between regulation that protects the consumers from being poisoned by their food, or regulation that protects the workers from being injured or killed on the job, and profit, it's probably best if the arbiter of what that perfect balance is not the profiteers, but rather an agency that's accountable to the people.
Yeah, this is a government agency. Their salaries are paid for by taxpayers. This should not be a place where corporate interests get to run wild. And there are other things too. It's not just people. Something I didn't mention in the article was that in the last few weeks, Sonny Perdue had withdrawn an Obama-era regulation that was set to go into effect quite soon, which would have protected animal welfare. So they just decided we're just going to get rid of it because our priorities do not lie with the welfare of the animals that are being farmed.
Alex, you need to write a whole nother article about that, because there are a lot of Americans who have tremendous sympathy for animals and the way that animals are treated in the agriculture industry. And I think that if you have a headline that's just about that, it might blow up all of this, and then they'll click and they'll read about the rest of the conflict of interest as well.
Sure, I could. I want to look into that, and so that's something I've kind of kept on the back burner for now. But it's not just that animal welfare; it's also things like sanitation, which aids the animals' lives and prevents them from getting sick. Also, can prevent the meat from being tainted. So I think these things between the animal rights and our health and nutrition, I think they're kind of linked in a way that maybe some people at the USDA don't think or don't realize or don't really care about.
Yeah, and that kind of brings it all home to the why should we care part of the conversation, which, maybe should always happen first. I asked a similar question to this panel of constitutional scholars who were making the case for impeachment of Donald Trump, and they spent an inordinate amount of time, actually, on conflict of interest, on the emoluments clauses in the Constitution, and the fact that Donald Trump and also the Kushner family, as we're learning more and more, have basically mixed their family businesses with American foreign policy in ways that could be to the detriment of the people in this country, even if it's to the advantage of their businesses. And I asked them, why do you spend so much time focusing on the financial self-dealing? And what they said is that if we only focus on the things that are the worst or the most infamous in the headlines, what that's saying to future presidents and future administrations is that as long as you don't get mixed up in, foreign governments to influence elections or obstruction of justice, the conflict of interest part is okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. As someone who does accountability journalism, it's important to call out all troubling aspects of any elected official. I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of these lobbyists I mentioned has a husband who is a recent lobbyist who now works at the EPA. This is a common thing. Another one of these USDA lobbyists has a spouse who has investments in Monsanto and Caterpillar, I believe. These are both major companies that are in the agriculture industry. So these are a couple that shares a bank account and then is personally invested in these companies that could benefit from USDA policies. So that's another can of worms is the financial interest and those conflicts.
Is there anything that you wanted to add before we go?
No, I mean the only other thing I'd say is that I imagine there are career staffers at places like the USDA, and if there's anyone out there who wants to speak with me, I have encrypted email. You can find it on my Twitter, so feel free to get in touch. I'd love to talk to anyone who's inside the agencies that wants to say something.
Alex Kotch, thank you for your excellent reporting for TYT Investigates. Keep at it.
Thanks a lot.